Do you struggle with food and body image issues that are negatively affecting your health and your weight? Well, I recently had a conversation with my friend Ana, who was able to heal an exercise eating disorder, digestive issues, and severe depression. We talk about how through a combination of yoga, conscious detoxification, and deep nutrition, we can begin to heal our relationship with food and with our bodies so that we can enjoy eating again and enjoy being in our own skin. The core of our conversation centers around the fact that true healing happens through pleasure, not pain. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I also invite you to access our free guide, which is linked below, that can help you get started on your own healing journey. Enjoy. Yeah, Anna, I thought it'd be good maybe if we just start with you sharing a little bit about your background and your story and kind of what led you into working with women and specifically specializing in feminine fasting.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, but I'll kind of give you the synopsis. And I really came from a background. I was in my other life, I was a professional dancer on track to do that. That was all I wanted to do with my life, from age 5. And it was a passion. But I also reached a point where I was very unhealthy. And this was, I had a kind of an exercise eating disorder where I would binge out, I would starve myself and then I would binge on really terrible foods. I mean, like fat free, but it was all not real food. So I would basically just binge out on things that were not real food filled with sugar and chemicals. I was dealing with infertility. So I was diagnosed with infertility at age 16. Um, I had acne, horrible acne all over my face, my back, my chest, and I had severe depression, severe, meaning I did want to end my life. So that was a very dark place, in addition to everything else. Horrible migraines that would put me into bed every month around my cycle if I did get my cycle. And this was a super dark time. I mean, beyond what you can really imagine. I also had digestive problems that often were alleviated only by not eating, which is eating. Interesting because we're talking about fasting, but
And
you
we'll
know,
get into that, the deeper
definitely get into
scope of
that.
all of that.
Yeah,
Yes.
so the depression and the horrible digestive issues that would send me doubled over sometimes when I was at work. I was waitressing a lot of those years and everything. So I was dealing with all of that and finally just broke down. Finally, I was in the dance studio. I was by myself. I literally just collapsed on the floor. I remember staring at the ceiling and crying, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't go on. Um, I didn't know what to do at that time, but I will share that I actually had what I call a spiritual messenger, an angel that came to me because I heard the words clear as day, you can feel better. And I was like, okay, that seems impossible, but I heard it
Mhm.
and I followed it. And I went on a journey. I knew that food was part of it. So that was when I started to study holistic nutrition and holistic health in general. So I went on my own journey. This was like 30 years ago. Yeah, about 30 years ago, and sought out healers, education. I got my education around that time and you know started slowly to pull myself out without medication. I want to underscore that. So I used no medication for the depression, which was pretty astounding. Um, yeah, pretty much nothing was medicated. So I did this all with holistic measures. And I do not have migraines anymore. I rebalanced my hormones. I, you know, came, this was through specifically plant-based foods. I did become a vegetarian at age, so I'm going to backtrack first. I did become a vegetarian at age 16, but it was not really for good reasons. It was because I was a dancer and I thought, well, this is going to keep me skinny, right? Which I guess, whatever, that's maybe there's nothing wrong with that, but I wasn't a healthy vegetarian, let me just be clear. And then there were some years where I would integrate animal products, but I really was focused on I really started to move into that more plant-focused place and what that gave me and the life force. I also found yoga
Mhm.
around that same time. And I call yoga the sneaky healer because I actually, again, I sought out yoga for kind of the wrong reasons, which was I left the dance world and I needed something to do with my body. I was so used to discipline and I was so used to doing something. And I needed that outlet and yoga seemed like a parallel to dance. So I went that route and I was obsessive and I applied very unhealthy things to it. However, over the years, all of a sudden I started to discover that like, it was almost like I had to look back and go, I have a relationship with my body now. I never had, I mean, I had a very horrible, disconnected, not listening, um, punishing relationship with my body prior. And the combination of being able to start to nourish my body first from a place that just was the disciplined part of me and like, I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna get this. And then gradually, with the assistance of what yoga brought forward, was from a place of self-honoring. So, really coming to this place of like, what does that mean? What does it mean to, because you can do anything from a place of punishment, meaning you could follow a protocol, you could do this thing. You can do that from a place of punishing. And you can also do it from a place of self-honoring. And I started to learn about the distinction and how specifically a woman's biology responds to that. And this, I essentially, when I look back, I see that I went through like an early menopause when I was in the destructive phase of what I was doing to my body. I was infertile, that's not normal I mean, I guess it can, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but especially in those days, that's not normal. And a lot of the things that I suffered from we can see those happen in an unbalanced female system once she starts to move into perimenopause and menopause, those same kinds of things. So I saw how that honoring, and now that I'm in the phase of moving through my own menopausal journey, and that I learned what I learned about a female body, about how you nourish yourself, like really, really nourish yourself, the vibration of that, of the plant foods, is specifically like more alive plant foods, um, in conjunction with that self-honoring, which is in my opinion, they're absolutely required to go together. And to come around to this point now where I do lead detoxes and cleanses and, work with this, and I've sort of like evolved into this whole idea of feminine fasting, realizing that this is a sacred way to honor the female vessel, but it has to come from that appropriate approach. As I say, I know we'll be talking about that, um, but I learned a lot, and knowing that I had a disorder, right, in how I treated food and how I treated my body, and that fasting sometimes can feel a little like, oh, is this but it's not, again, because it's really about where we come from with that. And that's a big part of what I bring forward with the whole idea of feminine fasting.
I think this is really key because we're talking about body issues, we're talking about food issues, and we're talking about ways also to become radiantly healthy in a good way in the physical body and of course in the mental emotional body. And something that I think is interesting is women who struggle, and men too, but we're specifically talking about women today that struggle with food issues. There can be kind of a background stigma in the mind. And I have found over time in doing this work, and I actually offer a workshop at the detox retreats where I teach yoga, specifically talking about food issues, because I found that everyone has some kind of a relational thing with food, even if it's just overeating on holidays and then feeling a little bit bad about that or guilty. I mean, food is such a deep connection to our life, to our survival, to our comfort. I mean, the first thing, if in best case scenario, when we're born into this world, is breastfeeding and that nurturance of the mother and being fed. And so there's such a deep connection there. And one thing I think can happen is when people struggle around food and body issues, they try to find the solution somewhere else. So they think the solution, maybe they go to a therapist, or maybe they try to actually get out of the body, if that makes sense. And so what you've described in your journey is so, I think it's such an amazing example of how you used your body, which your relationship with was not super healthy, but you used your body as the portal to heal that relationship through yoga, and then coming into a healthy perspective of fasting and cleansing, because detoxification and cleansing the body, I would say in this day and age, is essential. So it's not something to shy away from if we have a history of issues with our relationship with food and our body. It's actually something to go into. Often it's said that swimming is learned in water. And so I think this is a key thing as we go into our conversation, especially if women listening to this are thinking, well, I don't want to go there because it's been painful, it's been difficult. And so this is a way to find, how can you, instead of running away from eating, running away from looking at food, running away from feeling and being in the body, using things like yoga, feminine fasting, conscious detoxification to move, heal that relationship where it started, heal it at the roots.
Yeah, well, our most intimate relationship is with our body. Like, it doesn't get any more intimate than that. And, absolutely. And I think, you're so right. Like, detoxification is vital. And especially when we're talking about women, because of the hormonal impact of being able to release, just being able to clear things out and regularly. I'm not saying it's not important for men. It
Right,
is,
right.
but there's just a different hormonal makeup that we have that we need to support our liver. I mean, it's just, yeah, there's so much there.
Yeah. So what would you say? I mean, we kind of touched on this already a little bit, but if we could kind of crystallize for people, how would you say feminine fasting is different than just the standard approach you might see in the fitness world or the longevity scene, where it's kind of just a mixed bag? And then, of course, people are giving lots of different recommendations and ways to go about fasting. There's intermittent fasting, there's full-on deep water fasting, there's juice cleansing, which isn't technically a fast, but people are doing lots of different things. And so, what would you say? Really is the essence of feminine fasting, how that's different and why that matters.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's the distinction is, what's interesting here is there are just on the surface level, like especially if when I talk about like the different ways to incorporate feminine fasting, um, on the surface level, there can be some similarities. You can be like, well, I've heard about that. I've heard about water fasting, whatever, because it, a lot of this has to do with how you approach the fasting. So a lot, that's intention and how connected you are to your own. Let me actually say the understanding of the feminine physiology and also where a woman is in her journey as a woman. So that because there's a lot more fluctuations if we're looking at just like men fasting, they can do like a very like, okay, I do it like this. This is how, okay, that was what was recommended. I can do it like that every time. It's going to work every time. Done. A
Hmm.
woman is not like that.
Hmm.
And her physiology requires she has a more sensitive nervous system. She has a cyclical biology. Even after menopause. So, there could be the argument of like, oh, but she doesn't have her monthly cycle. No, she is still tied with this rhythm and a more sensitive nervous system, which is like it's important. It's important that we have that, but it also distinguishes us and what happens, especially like after 40, which is really the sector of the female population that I work with. After 40, this becomes even more enhanced. So we have to look at the nervous system regulation. We have to address that. And so that feminine fasting really isn't like, well, I just fast like this because so and so, such and such doctor said that I should do it like this. No, it really requires more than that and a deeper understanding. And that's where a lot of these more yogic principles come in and the other layers, the nervous system regulation, that there's also an honoring of the hormonal cycle. So if a woman is still menstruating, we can look at that and find an optimal window to incorporate the fasting. Whereas it's going to be other times during that cyclical energy for her that are going to be counterproductive, that are might even be detrimental, even though 2 weeks prior to that, she could have done that much more successfully. And this too, we can look at moon cycles, especially when a woman no longer has her menstrual cycle, then like lunar cycles can really be a part of the equation. And I work with astrology too, so it's kind of fun to weave into that. At the core of all this is knowing how to listen to your body, having guidance around that if you don't know how to listen to your body, nervous system regulation, and intention. Those are kind of the core things that I would say about feminine fasting and what makes it different.
Yeah, I think I love all of that. It's very beautiful. And what kind of I'm hearing you're saying, and what really resonates for me as well, is uh, even if you're a man, I see feminine fasting as really like you mentioned, the energy that you bring to the fast, the consciousness and the mindset. So when I think of feminine fasting, I think of it as a very gentle, nurturing approach to fasting, which honors the mind-body connection and honors the sensitivity of the person undergoing the cleanse or detoxification above and beyond the goal. So we think of, I mean, we can back up and just point out that feminine qualities and masculine qualities, we embody both, regardless of the physical form that we're in. And so in our more of our masculine nature can be a little bit more analytic, a little more strategic, kind of goal oriented, and sort of that straight line kind of energy, where our feminine aspect is more circular and holistic and much more into the right brain and the feeling and the emotional side of things. And so, just to put that out there, that men, I feel, could also benefit from a feminine fasting approach. Even if maybe we're not specifically looking at the hormonal aspects of it, but that energy, and I see this all the time when I'm teaching yoga, you've probably seen this as well, is students can come into my yoga classes, men or women, and they can come with a very yang or masculine approach to that class, and they're trying to get it right, and they're pushing and forcing and all of this, and this really goes against what you were mentioning, is that nervous system regulation. When we talk about detoxification, one of the core things, I would say number one, is the intent, as you said, and the energy that we bring to that process. And then number two is really having that gentleness and that softness around what we're doing, and more of that listening and honoring. Because if a woman has struggled with body issues, that's a type of war. That's a type of fighting. It's not a type of acceptance, nurturing, and love. And so when we come into feminine fasting, then we're bringing that nurturing energy above and beyond everything else. And that's really a holistic and a very community and relationship-based approach to fasting, and the core relationship being your relationship to your own body. And so this is something that I find is super powerful, because in my own experience, I've done cleanses. One of the very first cleanses that I did in my 20s to be healthy. I wanted to be healthy, and I got very inspired. Was a 10-day master cleanse. So also known as a lemonade diet. So it was maple syrup, fresh lemon juice, and cayenne pepper mixed in water. And they had some other things along with the protocol, but the book I read was 10 days. And so I was soaring for about 7 days, and then there was a shift. And I know this in hindsight, but at the time I didn't have the same experience, of course, I have now. Around day 7, I was done. My body was done, and she was ready. And not just my body, I would say even more probably my mental emotional self was kind of like, okay, you can do something when you're going through a cleanse where you're climbing, you get like a peak of your detoxification, and then there's having that subtlety to know when the cleanse is done and the perfect time to come off of the cleanse. And so that happened to me around day 7. Well, my mind said, oh, I'm going to go 10 days. And those last 3 days were very rough. And I feel that at the end of it, I felt kind of demoralized. And I think in many ways, we can do more harm than good if we're only approaching cleansing and detoxification with that more yang, masculine, goal-oriented approach, rather than bringing the feminine element into it.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, this, Sadeshwari, because detoxification is one of your things. It's like, if we need to actually be in parasympathetic, that more relaxed, de-stressed mode, in order for our bodies to detoxify, and in order for us to not be in the breakdown, meaning that it's more of a destructive rather than a constructive, because part of the beauty of detox and fasting and all of that is the repair that can happen, the deep cellular repair, which cannot happen if it's a pushing energy.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we could talk now about different types of fasts or cleanses that a person could do, and the benefits. Because I think when someone's new to cleansing and detoxification, I'll back up a little bit. I think pretty much everyone today knows that this is essential. With the world that we live in, and the toxins coming in from the food, the air, the water, and then not just physical toxins, but also toxic lifestyle, toxic relationships, environmental toxins as far as off-gassing from, plastic clothes to plastic carpets. And there's so many areas, even just social media scrolling, where we're being bombarded with things that are not in alignment and in harmony with our total balance and health. So I think, do we need to cleanse and detoxify is probably already clear to most people, but I think sometimes people can get a bit overwhelmed, like, where do I start? So, there's water fasting, juice cleansing, there's monofruit mealing, there's so many different things that people can do. So maybe we could just talk about, the different types of cleanses that people could do, and when they're the best fit, like who they're the best fit for, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a great question because there are, and that's kind of the beautiful thing is that there are multiple different ways to gain a benefit. So I always want to underscore that because that in and of itself is going to soothe any of that energy that's like, I have to do it this way and I have to do it like right or it's totally wrong.
Mhm.
Um, what I think is really important before I even talk about some of the different types um, is to know that go like having that clarity before you go in,
Mhm.
before and then it's the commitment. It's the commitment to the process, but again, knowing that that relationship, that listening to the body is going to, like you were just using that as a great example when you were talking about your master cleanse experience
Mhm.
so that's important because while you can have the intention, while you can kind of be clear on the process, that if there are signals that something needs to shift, it's really important to honor that. So it's a nuanced thing. It's like, okay, how do I commit to myself, commit to this honoring, which is what I call it, while getting, keeping the conversation going as you're moving through, just
Mhm.
like any relationship.
Mhm.
Um, so I'll start with, and typically, like, I want to make the caveat of if we're doing a true fast and we're sort of approaching it in the feminine, so this is, a water slash like your water having, I like to incorporate herbal teas too because those can be so beneficial. Um, while just, completely abstaining from like nutrition, so to say. Um, and I feel like this is out of my realm this is out of my scope of professional work. Yes, there is dry fasting. I personally don't resonate with that, um, as feminine energy. So it's just not like in the realm of what I would approach at all.
Mhm.
And that's just an aside. So if we're looking at water fasting, that would be sort of the top tier. Oh, let's not even call it the top tier, but
The deepest.
the deepest experience, right? The deepest place and to go. And typically what I like to say about that is I think there's a real sweet spot because like between 36 and 40 hours. But 24 hours can be really still so much. But if a woman is prepared, like if she is in a place, both it's like cyclically, all of that, nervous system wise, maybe even having the experience of having done some kind of cleansing or detox before, that 36 to 40 hour window can be very magical because it often will really clear things out and reset the digestive function, which again, especially over 40, is super important. It can help to rebuild some of the neurotransmitters. And I'll, as someone who struggled with depression and like terrible digestive problems, I can really speak to some of this. That can be a sweet spot. And like, but it's very important that is when, especially if you're doing just a water and, herbal tea, which I said I do like to incorporate those, that the space is cleared because that's not a time to be like, I'm gonna water fast and I'm gonna like still go for, my regular workout and I'm gonna, have the expectation that I'm going to work and taking care of the kids and da da da, I mean, no. I do think that this needs to be a time of of self-honoring and being able to get support in order to minimize what's required, ideally being out in nature. I think this regardless of the type of fast that you do, as much as you can, but especially when we're talking about water fasting, because it's going to be a deeper experience. And and I talk about this more when I'm like working with clients and stuff like that, but I'll even potentially incorporate some level of different low key supplementation just to kind of support the process and support the body. Um, and then of course, like a level up from that would actually be something like the master cleanse, because now you're providing your body, and I do that in a very specific way if I do that with clients, where your blood sugar, what you're looking to do is almost like mainline it.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is rather than, oh, I just, sip on my master cleanse concoction whenever I feel like it, you're actually very specifically keeping it consistent all throughout the day while you are awake. And
Mhm.
this is especially good for women or just people who are more sensitive and sensitive blood sugar, especially, and it keeps a very even keel for them.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you can run into the thing of like you get that little spike when you have a sip or whatever, a cup of it, and then you like go back down, and it's just harder on the system.
Mhm.
So I like that very even keel. Of course, then we can go a notch up from there and go into juice fasting. I would say fruits are going to be especially cleansing, more cleansing, whereas the greens and vegetables, that it's going to be more remineralizing and building. Both can be beautiful, but that's sort of the distinction on that. And that's going to be more of what I call like your feminine fed fast.
Mhm.
And, that's something that I know you do a lot in your work and just personally too. And then there's the OMAD of one meal a day, which might be like you actually have a full, let's say, you could do this in a way where you do like 3 days of just one meal a day, and you have like, oh, pretty much like a 24-hour period in between those meals. And these are hydrate, like, and this would be the most cleansing, where you have just from that like 11 to 2 o'clock window, you eat only hydrating fruit. That's it. You eat, that's your window. You have only had satisfied, not stuffed, and then the rest of the time you're having your fluids and that kind of a thing. And then you can also do, I kind of like the 3 days when we're talking about this. And I know that you have your 3-day juice fast. Um, and then you can also do a 3-day fruit fast where you're not just like one meal a day, but you're maybe having three mono type of very simple slash mono fruit meals, you know. You might even choose like, oh, today's going to be papaya day. I'm just going to eat papayas. Today's going to be banana day. I'm just going to, or just grape day or whatever that is. And I would say, even though that's not the one meal a day thing, I would really try to keep, because it's in the space in between ingestion that our body really deep cleans and restores and everything. It's nice to keep that eating window still to no more than 8 hours a day when the intention is to do this. But this is progressively getting more nourishing,
Mhm.
so that if the nervous system needs more of that, it's really, really beneficial. And I would even say, if you do choose to do like a 3-day fruit fast, that rather than you're just continuously eating all day, that maybe you do segment it out. I'm going to have these 3 meals or 2 meals or whatever it is, so that again, there's a little bit of space to give the body time to process And definitely during all of these, focusing on sitting down, eating slowly, chewing, even if you're juicing, chewing, breathing, getting sunshine, getting outside, getting in nature. This is all going to really help. I mean, I could say that too, there's like the fully fed fast, which at this point I think gets more into just like a cleansing, like I'm doing a detox where you might do 3 to 5 days, that 8 hour eating window. You do fruit, fresh juices. So it's like an incorporation of the fruit, the fresh juices, maybe raw or lightly steamed vegetables, maybe adding in some leafy greens, a broth, like a vegetable broth or something, homemade, something like that, where that to me, yes, that could be a fully fed fast in a way, but it's more of like a detox cleanse. So,
Yeah. And I think it's important, when someone's approaching, like which level to go, how deep to go. Do they want to go all the way into a complete water fast, or do they want to do something in between, like you were talking about, maybe a juice feast, or then maybe more of a fully fed cleanse, something like that. That whole spectrum, I think something that's really important for people to consider is their personality and their setup. So it's like not one size fits all. And even though every style of cleanse has its particular benefit, rather whether we want to really go into autophagy when we're into the deep water fast, or we want to just go more into like cleansing the digestive tract, which may be something that's a little bit more fibrous, with doing colon cleanses and things like that. But many times when I'm considering for my own self, like I feel like I want to approach a cleanse, or if I'm working with someone, a lot of it has to do with what you mentioned, where we are in our stage in life, and as far as like hormones and all of that, but also where we are, like what our goal is, because people have different reasons. For me personally, when I'm approaching a cleanse, I'm not doing it to heal anything, because I that happened in the past. I had different ailments and things I was dealing with until I cleaned up my body, did some detoxification, got onto clean nutrition. So for me, at this point, it shifted from more of a physiological approach to why I'm doing a cleanse, to more of a mental and emotional, and many times even spiritual. You were mentioning being connected with nature. When I did the longest water fast that I've done was seven. Well, I did one with 10 days, but the first one I did 7 days. That was more longer than just a 24-hour or 36-hour. And I did it, like you mentioned, out in nature. And I will say that was very beneficial and healing to be close to the earth. But also, I realized how important it was to have that space, because as the body begins to detoxify, some of these toxins can get on your nerves, literally, as they're being passed through the system. And so having a very calming environment, something that's not chaotic and not demanding, especially when you go into deepest levels of fasting, is, I think, really important. And then, as you mentioned, being clear on why am I doing this? Because many times people will jump in, or they'll tell me, I had someone recently say, I really want to do a juice cleanse. I said, okay, so why do you want to do the juice cleanse? Well, they weren't really clear on, and there were good reasons. They were really good reasons. And so I think, as you were mentioning, having that clarity on why we're doing it and what we're trying to accomplish. And so water fasting can accomplish different things than maybe juice feasting or doing a mono fruit meal. And depending on where somebody is in their life, their lifestyle, their ability to sit, for example, take time off of work and family duties to really go into deep rest, like a water fast would require, an extended water fast, versus maybe they have a heavy load and they just want to start gently cleansing the body, and something like moving into a mono fruit diet for a period of day where you're going to have a lot of energy, you're going to have all those great fruit sugars, and keep that. One thing I've noticed personally is that when we take out the sugars completely, like in a full water fast, I am much more prone, and I think many others, I think this is common, you can share if this has also been your experience, is it goes deeper into the emotional body at that point. And so I've had an experience where I've been just even doing a short water fast, where I had a client session in the morning, in the late morning, and I was about 36 hours in, and I was wanting to do 72 hours. Again, that was kind of my plan. And about 36 hours in, it was a few hours before this client session, and I just felt pretty dull, pretty kind of ragged, and but it was more emotional than physical. I just didn't feel so great. I just felt kind of slumpy, and I probably was processing some emotions, which happens, when we're cleansing. So I thought, okay, and I made myself a little, at that point, I think I just had some juice, some fresh juice, fruit juice. And instantly with those fruit sugars, I felt it was a little pick me up. I felt more clear. I felt more vibrant, more positive, and more kind of in focus in order to be able to work with my clients. So the point I guess I'm getting at is there's a time and a place for everything, and having that experience, or knowing, or working with someone like yourself that has that experience to know, uh, should I dive? I've seen people do this. They're like, I want to do a water fast, and they dive right in, and they're not ready for physical detox symptoms or mental emotional detox symptoms. And then what happens is they think they failed, or they go off of the fast, and not really getting the full benefits. And sometimes you can do more harm than good if you're not really sure about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and having, like you said, that a good plan, so you kind of know exactly what you're doing, rather than kind of going willy-nilly and then not really knowing what's going to happen, and then having things go sideways.
Yeah, and I, I think that's so true that there has to be a willingness if you take one of the deeper options, there has to be an understanding and a willingness to go, okay, I'm going to face this. I'm stripping away all of the sort of buffers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll call it that, like the buffers, and that I'm ready to go through what is there and come out on the other side. And I think too, something I didn't mention too is seasonality, like the
Mm-hmm.
season, and that actually, this is something I've talked about. Winter is, even though we might think the opposite, winter is actually very conducive. Winter, and I would say spring, especially conducive to more of the water fasting,
Mm-hmm.
simply because of the season being more inward. There's less just in nature, there's less abundance in nature. So it is kind of a time of austerity, and it's
Mm-hmm.
usually in most places colder, and so there's an opportunity to go more inward. It's more supported. It's more
Yeah.
supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, something too, like you were saying, it's like we've been talking about the preparation, being prepared. However, there's also very important, I didn't say this when I was talking about all the cleanses, it's it's almost more important. How do we transition out of
Yes.
whatever we've chosen, whatever path we've chosen? That is very important. We want to support our body in reintegrating into whatever, style of eating we're going to go into.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it just kind of went through my mind a few minutes back, and I thought about mentioning it. But it's true, and I don't know if you're familiar with John Rose, but he was had a big run on YouTube. I think he's stepped back a little bit from now, but he used to say over and over, he's a big advocate of juice feasting for 90 days. Go the distance is his big thing. And something he said, though, that's so true, whether it's juice feasting or water fasting or whatever, he has said that any fool can fast, but it takes a wise person to really be able to know how to transition out of that. And I think this comes back to some of the ways of thinking around food and body issues, is that in a way, uh, it's easy to do something rigid that the mind sets out. So you can see this like with anorexia, or with like over exercising, or whatever, where it's like this kind of all black or white thinking and all or nothing, where it's like this rigidity. And that was why I was touching on earlier that importance of feminine fasting perspective, where we're really feeling into what's going on. And so it's not as much of a mentally led fast as it is more of a heart-centered, emotionally led fast, where we're tapping more into the intuitive side of that. And that comes back to, like I mentioned before, when you feel like, okay, something's shifting here and my cleanse is over, even though I planned 10 days, it was over at 7 days. And so having that wisdom to be present with what's going on throughout the cleanse. Like, I would kind of say having the masculine perspective where you decide what you're going to do and why, and having that masculine framework. And then during the cleanse, honoring the plan and the masculine structure, but then really embodying the feminine aspect of the feeling and being in touch with that. Because when we talk about disordered eating, it's the opposite. You know, disordered eating is really being out of touch with the body and completely in, almost a punitive, like extreme, I would say, both the masculine and feminine have their divine qualities. They also have their toxic qualities. So I would say is more on the spectrum of the toxic male quality of like punishing the body, forcing, this very authoritative approach to cleansing and detoxification. And I think people who have struggled with eating issues, they're really good at doing that part. So they're really good at doing a 7-day water fast or a 21-day water fast or whatever the case may be. But where the struggle comes in, as we're talking about, is transitioning off of that cleanse. And how can we do that without doing the pendulum swing from the extreme here and then the extreme over there, which many times over control and over rigidity translates into over permissiveness or liberalness, where then everything just kind of goes out the window. So I think that approaching detoxification, cleansing, and fasting from that feminine approach, there's much more of a holistic honoring and keeping things fluid, so we're not in a rigid framework. And then as we transition out, we're not going into anything extreme or rigid on the way out, but we're still incorporating that presence and that holistic approach and that being in tune with the body and with the emotions. And this really, I would say, is the best time for people to look at the relationship with food. Because when we're cleansing and fasting, many times at the surface level, we'll have like cravings. And this is kind of habits of the mind, like, patterns and things that have been throughout childhood or whatever. They come up, oh, I miss the pizza, I miss the nachos, I miss this thing or that thing. And I had this experience when I did an extended water fast. I had all these mental images and impressions coming up of foods that I thought I wanted. But as I transitioned off and I did it, I got some guidance and I did a lot of reading and things. And so I came off slowly from, didn't just jump into something which could be even dangerous. But
Right.
I was noticing, and because of that conscious awareness and feeling into the body, as soon as I started to break the fast slowly and started refeeding, I realized I didn't actually have any desire for those foods. They were just mental impressions coming up. And so I feel that the feminine approach to fasting is very much interconnected with being present and really feeling and being conscious between the difference of just the mind saying, oh, I've fasted for this many days, now I get a reward, or I get, watching what the stories are in the mind that kind of derail us, and having that awareness and then choosing to honor our body rather than just running off with the mind.
100%. And yeah, I mean, you spoke to so much, just even that was so personal to me, of this extreme disconnection from my body when I was, in my darker times. I literally remember just looking at myself in the mirror, and I was very disconnected from that image. And it was like I would like grab onto my body and just felt like I just wanted to like, it was a very strange thing. I can't even explain it. And punishment, 100%. My mentality was punish, force. And now I talk a lot about pleasure.
Mhm.
And what you're explaining too is like that sensuality, being in the body requires to be connected to your senses. And
Mhm.
that includes your sixth sense of intuition, which is the elevated version of that. And that's in a lot of ways a feminine superpower, but it's through we have to connect to those first five senses in order to really be able to attune to that. And when we talk about this punishing, I feel like the other end of that is pleasure, but
Mhm.
it's but many women, including myself in my own journey, have to rewatch. But what is pleasure? What
Mhm.
is really pleasure? What really does that mean? Because pleasure is not being, punishing and disconnected from your body for 99% of the time, and then 1% of the time saying, oh, but what would really give me pleasure is to just like gorge out on a whole chocolate cake and then feel like garbage again and go back into this cycle. Was that pleasure? Was that pleasure?
Mhm.
Or can you actually receive pleasure 99.9% of the time? Maybe 100%.
Mhm.
What if that was like the pleasure? Yeah, I think pleasure is such an interesting word.
That no, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's so synchronistic because I just watched a video yesterday, and I'll share it with you. Was the woman was talking about that, and she was talking about it from a um, more of a midlife sexuality and sensuality perspective. But it does really weave back into food because food is supposed to be pleasurable, and yet with all of these food chemicals and toxins and processed foods and things like that, it's kind of hijacked the pleasure center of the brain to our detriment. So you said something so key, which ties in very deeply with intuitive eating and conscious eating, mindful eating, and realizing that if our body is not clean, and if there's a lot of toxicity in the physical body, then our intuition and our inner guidance about what we are drawn to be consuming is probably not going to be accurate. And then if you layer on top of that a lot of emotional eating and a lot of unresolved mental emotional issues, we're not going to have a clear compass. And this is where conscious cleansing and feminine fasting can come in to help recalibrate the body so that we have actually true nutritional cravings and intuition that what resonates with the physical body. And then that conscious eating piece where, just as you mentioned, so many people say, well, what would be really pleasurable is to go eat a huge, an entire pizza. It's not pleasurable. If we've overeaten or if we've eaten foods that aren't in agreement with our physiology, then it's a quick hit, and then many hours, if not days, weeks, months, or years of suffering. And we only really can catch that if we're being conscious about what we're doing. And so, as you mentioned before, I'm a big advocate for being present when we eat. Around the same time I started practicing yoga in my 20s, I realized I was addicted to doing something while I ate. So, and it was funny because I had a magazine. It was Yoga Times or something. It was a yoga magazine on my kitchen table, and I would come home from work and I would sit down to eat, and I just had to be looking at that magazine. And I thought, why do I have, I really looked at that. And I think for most people, it's so normal. Turn on the TV, eat your meal, or be driving down the street, or even talking with a friend. There's a time and place for everything. But I have found that eating alone, at least some of my meals, and just really tasting and feeling, connecting with the energy of the food that I'm consuming helps me really dial in that compass of what is working for me and what isn't working for me and what is truly pleasurable. And I think this is a deeper subject as well, that we've been socially conditioned to, and I think that a lot of this comes actually out of the religious conditioning, that there's something bad or wrong with pleasure. And, be seeking pleasure in one way or another is either considered lazy, it's considered gluttonous, there's all these negative terms around when people are doing something to seek pleasure. And I would say that pleasure seeking is actually at the core of our being, because being totally balanced, very well nourished and fulfilled in your life is deeply pleasurable. Everything you do begins to become pleasurable. But because we have this dysfunctional relationship with pleasure, then we could sort of suppress that as being indulgent or lazy or frivolous or whatever it may be. If you go and pamper yourself at the spa, or there's all these negative connotations. And so I think many of us are suffering from generations of conditioning that says that pleasure is something, there's something sinful and bad and wrong with enjoyment. And then what happens is then we subconsciously or consciously suppress that, and we do the hard work, and we get things done. All is a little bit more of the kind of the toxic male energy creeping into that, where we get so devoid of pleasure, and so sort of impoverished of pleasure, that then people go into these unhealthy ways of pleasuring themselves, whether it's overspending, overeating, over sexualizing, overindulging, getting drunk, all the things, because people are so desperate for true pleasure and true fulfillment that then they seek all these outer things that, as you mentioned, the whole chocolate cake or whatever, it gives that instant, like, oh, finally I get my pleasure. And then there's a whole mountain of pain that comes along with it. And so I think we would be served really well to begin to find ways to bring more pleasure into our day, whether, like I do coffee enemas. And I love the smell of coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I love the smell of coffee. And so when I'm making the coffee enema, it's just a whole ritual, because for me, it's an act of self-care and self-love. And my coffee enema time is a bit of a meditative time. So I'm making the coffee and I'm smelling the coffee, and I'm enjoying that smell and that pleasure. And many times when we approach eating, and even if it's cleansing, whether we're doing a cleanse or we're, just eating our regular style, when you bring more conscious attention and more openness to fulfillment and pleasure in a way that's very free and embracing of that as a way of life, suddenly our pleasure tank gets filled, and we're no longer seeking all of these, really quick dopamine hits to get pleasure, because there's a deeper pleasure and satisfaction that comes. And I know you've had this experience as well, that the more we connect in to the body and heal that relationship and take care of the body is a very pleasurable place to be. When our body is healthy and we're at a very healthy, balanced, lean body weight, and we're approaching it with that self-care. Just the other day, I was getting into bed, and just the feel of the covers and the sheets, it was very pleasurable just to lay down, like if we've been up all day and then we lay down, there's that yin yang of when we haven't eaten for a while and we've got a good hunger, and then we enjoy a healthy meal. Those yins and yangs are also very pleasurable. So that whole balance of life, I think, is one of the most healing things that we can do to repair our relationship with our self and with our body, and also just our environment, our life all together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've done a lot of study tantra, tantric
Yes.
yoga, which is like the body as the vessel to spiritual. Like it's not that we need to surpass our bodies or get outside of our, I mean, we're here embodied. And a big part of that is, as you had mentioned too, like the sexuality. And I have to say that, and I incorporate a lot of this into my work with clients, because the thing, one of the key pieces, and I think, you were even alluding to this with a video that you were watching about this, is that a lot, I'm not going to say all, but like there's a fair amount of, depending on the woman, when you do reach this perimenopause, menopause, and like these shifts are happening, I want to look at, well, what has been the relationship to the body and to sexuality and to pleasure on that very body level? Like a lot of times it's been cut off because of shame, because of trauma. I want to honor that. I've had my own trauma, very much so. And I think most women have had it, but it's like, in order, like, in order to really heal, that really needs to be gone into back through the avenue of the body in a safe environment.
Right.
And because those things are stored in our body, and that there can be an achievement through some of these practices, which gradually bring us into a greater capacity for pleasure, for true pleasure, for being able to have that. I'm just, you know, feeling pleasure being in my body.
Just being. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that, I think that's a beautiful way to kind of wrap up our conversation because it circles full all the way back around to the point of pain that may be fueling disordered eating or body dysmorphia or any of this kind of stuff is also the pain of liberation. And so that willingness to
Yeah.
come and meet that pain, and I think the work that you do is a great way to invite women into a safe space where they can travel that sometimes scary journey. It's a big unknown, and it's a place that we've been avoiding because anyone who's an emotional eater, anyone who's experienced trauma, I mean, any of these things, which actually is the majority of the population, to whatever degree that may be, does create a type of divorce from the body and feeling. And so, really, what we're talking about here is how do we approach detoxification, cleansing, feminine fasting in a way that is supported and very intentional about I'm not just entering into a cleanse to shed a little bit of body fat or to tune up my immune system or all the beautiful things that cleansing and fasting can provide on the physiological level, but I'm also entering this as a sacred space to meet myself, to reconnect that relationship and repair that relationship with myself, with food, with being in my body, because I've worked with women who literally are just completely disconnected from hunger signals, the whole, and yoga is very challenging for these women because for the first time for a lot of them in decades, I'm asking them to go back into their body and feel what's going on in there. And this is something that is not new at all in the yogic world, but for people who are not, live in this fast-paced Western society where it's go do, go do, go do, the TV's on, get to work, get the kids, do this, do that. There's never really that sacred space and time to tune into the body. And so of course we're just eating whatever and going through the drive-through and not having any connection to how those foods actually make us feel. They actually are pleasurable and enjoyable and contributing to our health. There's a complete disconnect on all levels. And so what we're sharing here is really an invitation for women to come back into that nurturing space, first and foremost for themselves, and connecting in with that self-love, and then approaching the body, healing and detoxifying the body as a way to also repair their relationship and come to a place where they can access that healing. And underneath that healing is where we come into that true pleasure and true fulfillment.
So, so, so true. And it is, you know, I just, I want to say that there's so much, as we close this out, I want to say there's so much beauty to be accessed on the other side. And I also really want, sometimes it's hard when people know me now that they can't quite conceptualize where I have come from. And so in my own journey, I really my message to women, to really anyone who thinks that they're feels like they're in this place and they're just like, there's no way. There's no way that I could connect to my body. There's no way that I could feel real pleasure. There's no way that that I could come out of depression without medication. That I just want to say there absolutely is. I mean, I give thanks for my life every day because I almost lost it. And I really, really urge people to know that it's possible and that guidance is gold. Get a guide, get guides, plural, and that are safe space. And that's really what's important.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think too, if women are feeling a little bit fearful and not sure, where to start, many times the mind has a way of making something seem bigger and scarier than it really is. And
Yeah.
so I think the key thing to keep in mind is if what we're talking about is hitting a chord with you and resonating, then just know that you only have to do one thing. Like and then the next day one thing. So it's not the whole journey in one leap. And what you can find is that once you start treading that path, you start building those skills, rebuilding that relationship, and things start to gain some momentum. And as Anna pointed out, there's a whole world on the other side of that we're just not aware of. And that's part of what we do, is to help women reconnect and rediscover that, one step at a time. So,
Mhm.
not having to jump off and not having to even be clear on any of the things we talked about, why you're interested in cleansing and fasting, how to start, all of these things can be overwhelming at the beginning. And so there's definitely support available. And I'll put links below this video. As I mentioned previously, Anna and I both have free guides if you want to just kind of explore that, get your feet wet, you feel like you can do it on your own. And then also, I'll put links how you can get in touch with either of us. If you do want to find a little bit deeper support, we can have a conversation about what that looks like, where you are, what you really need at this point in your journey, and how to get on that other side where there is that freedom, food freedom, that healthy relationship with your body, and just that peace, that inner peace and contentment where you can actually begin to find pleasure again, living in the body, accepting the body, pleasure with eating, and just pleasure with everyday life.
100%.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I found this really valuable, actually, personally, and I think that our audience will find it as valuable as well. And is there anything you want to share before we close out?
Yeah, again, I just want to underscore the fact that like it is one step at a time. It's, it's like you're hearing this message for a reason too. So like just like I heard that voice, if I hadn't heard that voice, I don't know where I would be. Um, but similarly, you're with us, you're hearing this for a reason. So allow that to just be what's the next step after that. And yeah, and it's just both Sadeshwar and I both have free communities as well. So that could be a stepping stone. Yeah, and you'll see more about that in the links below.
Yeah, and Anna and I also have talked about doing some more videos. So if you have something that either we touched on today in this video or something else that we didn't talk about at all in this whole sphere, then definitely leave us comments below and let us know what you would like to hear about going forward. And then when we get together next time, we will take that into consideration and offer really the things that you feel are the most beneficial for you on your health and wellness journey.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to you and to everybody watching, and we will see you in the next video.